The occasion was a banquet in honor of Hanan, the youngest son of the old high priest. It was a glorious moonlit night. The heavens were covered with a pearly veil of light, and at our feet Jerusalem lay sleeping in a web of shadows. We were drunk with the manifold odors of flowers and sweet-blossoming plants, which even in those hottest months had been richly watered. The jasmine and the towering iris, the rose and the lavender, troubled the air with the lure of their scent. We lay stretched on couches in the columned hall of Hanan's house. The perfumed head of my friend Theophilus rested on my shoulder, and we watched, by the discreet light of hanging oil lamps, the dancing of Abisheleg, the most beloved girl of Jerusalem, accompanied by the music of invisible harps. Her perfect limbs flowed before us in waves of rhythm. She was still very young, in the third lustrum of her age, and her body was still gathered up in itself, like a bud before the moment of its opening. The alabaster shimmer of her skin broke through the delicate weave of Zidonian linen which hung in folds from her hips, and her body, almond-light, compact of blood and milk, followed in close, severe discipline the harmony of her dance. Her belly, encircled with a wreath of leaves, trembled and twisted spasmodically, like the surface of an overflowing lake, and the bud of her breast sang in motion the song of her imminent ripeness. But what delighted us most was the snake play of the line of her back. A cascade of whiteness was poured down into the soft and smooth double roundnesses, and the supple backbone trembled and bent through a gamut of serpentine motion. And while our eyes drank in thirstily the welling harmony of the dance, so that we forgot the honey-rich grapes and the honey-scented pomegranates and the figs bursting with sweetness, which the young Phoenician slaves offered us in baskets of woven gold, we heard suddenly, from a dim corner of the hall, a voice, filled at once with womanly allurement and disturbing sadness, raised in declamation. Who can arrest and hold back the breath of youth which is on our bodies, and which is like the night dew on the rose? Who can seal up the firmness of our limbs, that they may not fall into ruin before the storm of time? Who can suspend, even for the duration of a moment, our progress toward destruction? Who knows as well as ourselves the nothingness of our being? He has made us the witnesses of our own downgoing. He has made our bodies the nest of worms which we breed for our own destruction. What is beauty which passes like a mist? The wind takes it up and carries it away. Over what shall we rejoice? Over that which once was and now is no more? Are not our days like those of the hired laborer in the field? Like a slave who longs for the shadow of night, we long for the shadow of death. The girl suspended her dance, and we became silent and motionless. The head of Theophilus trembled on my shoulder. Then Hanan signaled to the slaves to withdraw. A dead, oppressive stillness rested on all of us. The girl Abisheleg, the beauty of whose body was a byword in Judea, burst into hysterical tears, and at that moment the woman who had extinguished the gaiety with her song of lamentation rose from her corner. It was Miriam of Migdal. She approached little Abisheleg and took the girl under her veil, while she wiped away her tears with her kerchief, and led her into the dim corner from which she had emerged. Later, I became more closely acquainted with Mary of Migdal. Indeed, she held us all like hounds on a leash. Some she let approach her, others she held off implacably. There were also times when it pleased her to know not a single one among her many lovers, and to permit no one to cross her threshold. The most favored man was never certain of her. Young Hanan, it was said, was one of her official admirers, and she had cost him great sums of money. His brother Theophilus and his wife were visitors in her house, and marvelous evenings were passed there. Of one of these I shall tell later. One of the Ascalonite officers of our garrison was desperately in love with Miriam of Migdal. Another man, Kalman ben Kalman, the son of a millionaire of Jerusalem, who had inherited possessions in farms and fields and forests of olive trees, the extent of which was beyond his reckoning, had also been deeply affected, and showered her with costly presents. But it appeared that the admirer whom she admitted most closely into her confidence was a Babylonian princeling, who, for her sake, had converted to the Jewish faith. He made frequent pilgrimages to Jerusalem, where he offered sacrifices with a lavish hand. He had built for Miriam of Migdal a house in the Babylonian style, situated in the lower city. She had, moreover, countless admirers among the Jewish merchants of Alexandria, Antioch, and Caesarea, who came on business and pilgrimage to Jerusalem. It was a characteristic caprice of hers, which had made her choose the poorest part of the city for her house, and to refuse to live among the aristocracy of the upper city, or in the new quarter on the slope of Mount Scopus beyond the Sheep Gate, a district which had of late become fashionable because it afforded room for gardens. She had made her home close to the wall which divides the city from the valley of the Kidron. It was not a pleasant quarter to live in. Indeed, only one other quarter could have been less attractive, namely the valley beyond the Dung Gate, the valley of Hinnom, where the waters of Siloah ran through gutters, and the lepers had made their camping ground. Not for nothing had the name Gehinnom, or Valley of Hinnom, become the symbol of the pit of punishment reserved for the wicked in the world to come. Certainly it was not a fitting place for a lady of her standing. If there were no lepers, there were multitudes of men and women afflicted with other sicknesses. They gathered round the waters of the Kidron, and they filled the air with the stench of their diseases. Vast swarms of insects bred in the valley, for on the other side, at the foot of the Mount of Olives, the high priest, or rather the house of Hanan, had its stalls and the storerooms for the hides of the sacrifices. The servants and slaves of the high priest washed the hides in the Kidron, preparing them for the market. The filth which reigned in that part of the city was indescribable. All the garbage of Jerusalem was carried out through the Dung Gate and flung into the Kidron Valley. Beggars poked among the midden heaps, seeking the remnants of the meals of the rich, or rags with which to cover their shame. Here, in this section, she had built her house. Here, in the heart of Jerusalem's poverty, among the narrow, fetid alleys, the walls of her house rose behind cypresses and olive trees. Thus her doors were forever beleaguered by the armies of the poor, and her servants, under her strict orders, were forever issuing with platters of food or gifts of money. An overwhelming love of life impelled her to drain to the dregs the beakers of joy, but there always lingered on the rim the taste of poison, restlessness, and remorse, left there by the religious madness which gave her no peace. All her servants went about clad in the ritualistic fringes of their religion. No image of man or beast was permitted in the house. The appointments were of the richest material, but devoid of ornament. There was no trace anywhere of the art or the customs of the Roman and pagan world, and within the circle of her walls reigned the severe discipline of her faith. Even when I first became acquainted with her, she was already subject to religious seizures, a general characteristic, I may observe, of Oriental peoples. She had surrounded herself with a band of interpreters of the law, scholars and scribes. They were not, of course, the authentic and accepted sages who preached and taught in the temple courts. Those would not have come within 100 paces of her, and whenever she sent a gift or sacrifice to the temple, there was endless disputation whether it ought to be accepted, for her money was considered unclean. However, there were scholars enough of dubious standing who were troubled by fewer scruples in regard to her profession. They did not fail to threaten her with the fires and demons of Gehenna, but they gave her assurance of another life too, because she devoted the wealth of her admirers to benevolent purposes, the most important being, naturally, the support of scholars. There were also the hosts of the poor, who transformed her house into a refuge of poverty, wretchedness, and sickness. The streets were black when she was carried forth in her litter, preceded by 2 servants with bags of dinars to distribute to the rabble. Beyond all this, she gave with a liberal hand to various institutions founded by the charitable women of Jerusalem. The range of benevolences was extraordinary, and stretched from the care of poor women in childbirth to easing the last days of condemned criminals. I need hardly say that Miriam of Migdal was not admitted to membership in the institutions of the noble ladies of Jerusalem. They were even reluctant to accept her gifts, but her scholars had managed to find an interpretation of the law which left the letter of it intact without interrupting the flow of money. And she, the proud and beautiful woman, did not take offence. On the contrary, she was overwhelmed with joy at being permitted to contribute the golden dinars given her by her lovers.